Containment failure detected. Warp core breach imminent.
Well, welcome back to Warp Core Breach. I'm not quite sure anyone expected this to ever come back, but I'm David Montgomery, and here he is, the Tuvok to my Rolaren.
Nick Norris.
And if you haven't seen Picard Season 3, I'm sorry I spoiled something, but that intro won't make sense to you. But yes, we are talking kind of about legacy today, and no, not the hopeful spin-off Star Trek series that we get. We thought there was really no better way to come back to Warp Core Breach than to talk about the legacy of the man, the myth, the legend himself, Jean-Luc Picard.
Dun, dun, dun.
And, growing up, Jean-Luc Picard was my captain. I mean, I was born in '89. Next Gen had been on the air for some time. A couple of years at that point. A young child's not really going to watch or have any memories of anything they're watching on television at that point. But I have distinctive memories at like age 5 of riding my bike home to catch an episode of Next Gen. Whether it was new or whether it was a rerun, that I don't know. But there was something very captivating about that show. And it was Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, that tied that together, for me at least.
Due in no small part, the father of the family.
Right. I mean, hey, none of this is possible without Gene Roddenberry. But
I meant more the father of the D.
Well, yes.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard.
Yes. And Picard was there. I don't think he wanted to be a father figure in any means. We kind of see that late in the series when...
Yeah, maybe not in the personal sense. Yeah.
Let's see. The episode where the Enterprise... What is it? They hit some spatial anomaly that cuts power, and then it's Troy's in command of the bridge with Ro and Miles, and
the one with Picard stuck in the turbo lift with the kids.
Yes, and he kind of has the fatherly role thrust upon him, and
the more literal, right?
Yeah, and moments like that kind of stick with me. And I know we're kind of jumping out of order here, but that episode growing up did hit a note in my psyche of simply, there are going to be moments in life where you are going to have circumstances that happen to you that you may not enjoy, you may not be ready for, but it's how you respond to them. And that's what defines who you are. And Captain Picard exemplified being ready for anything and everything, handling it with a certain grace and poise, and then having his issues, his confidence breaks, his meltdowns in the privacy of the ready room, at home and in front of his brother. That wrestling scene in the mud is kind of the truly human moment of Picard. That's like the most
humanizes the man that was so stoic under so much pressure, who went through assimilation seemingly unfazed, only for us to see how it really and truly did affect him.
Yes, and boy, the way Next Gen kicks off with Encounter at Farpoint, and it's like, okay, Picard comes in as this just tough, brutal, strict captain, dressing down Riker, going, okay, you know how to redock the ship, right? You know, put the star drive section back to the saucer. Okay, do it. Oh no, by hand. And I'm not sure the show would have worked if Picard had had that attitude for 7 seasons.
No, it wouldn't have flown.
I think there's a certain moment that you need to establish that tone. But
Mind you, the feel of the tone, like you said, the tone would have shifted. It would have been less about Picard. It would have been more about the crew in dealing with this, overly powerful boss, this power tripping sort of guy, right?
yeah, Picard definitely would have been distant. He would not have been a relatable uh, captain
Yeah.
or even cast member. And I know, there are so many stories about Patrick Stewart not unpacking his bags for the first 2 seasons, maybe even into the third season, and
Marina Sirtis, same. Yeah.
right, because he was coming off of the Royal Shakespeare Company, all of this, very professionally trained actor, amazing actor, but still those moments of doubt and going, well, I'm not sure this is gonna last. And I mean, to be fair, the first 2 seasons of Next Gen, bit rocky, but fun.
Just a bit.
Fun still.
Mm-hmm.
In going through a rewatch here in the last year or so, those episodes are fun, but are not ones I go back and look at and go, oh yeah, that's the shining example of Star Trek that I want to show people when they go, hey, why are you really into Star Trek? I don't go, oh yeah, season 1 and 2 of Next Gen, let's go watch those.
Well, I will say that my son's 17 now, and he never got to watch The Next Generation and only a little bit of TOS. So he and I watched the entire 1 through 7, every episode, one after the other of TNG recently, like in the last 2 years. And I found that season 1 and 2 is far better than we remember it. At least from me and my son's point of view. Like, a lot of the stuff that in my memory I was kind of dressing down and going, oh, that was pretty bad, actually wasn't that bad. In contrast to season 3 on, they grew so much. They did so much better. But taken as they were presented at the time, they're really not that bad. I had similar feelings about like first half of season 4 of Enterprise, where in my mind they were crap. But I went back and rewatched them, and it's like, damned if almost every episode of season 4, except for the final one, was great. It was the best season of Enterprise. And then, so season 1 through 2 of TNG, I found way more satisfying and fit more solidly than I had remembered.
Yes, aside from the occasional clunker of an episode, which was bound to happen. But
they were all clunkers in a sense, but don't forget, they're coming off of the 60s cheese, trying to find their own identity in the 80s.
Right. And there's
so
still amazing
that,
moments.
Right?
Fantastic moments that exist. And a lot of stuff that still holds up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I remember with Picard, even in those first 2 seasons, you start going, okay, who is he? How are we going to relate to him? He's drastically different than Kirk. He's not going down on the away teams. He's not the adventure guy. That guy's Riker.
Yep.
Picard's going to be our diplomat. He's going to be the guy on screen talking people down, trying to not get the ship blown up. But even in that first encounter with Q, that set a tone. Like, Picard is there, and he's not putting up with the shenanigans. He has to a certain extent, because he realizes he is outmatched Completely. He is powerless against Q outside of the intellect.
Exactly. Not that Q would admit the intellect side of things.
Okay. Q has a much greater intelligence. At least by the numbers. Q knows more things.
But not necessarily emotional maturity.
Correct. Which is where Picard's come in, and he's come back and he said, I know what I know what I don't know, but more importantly, or most importantly, I know how to use what I know and my limitations to help me be better.
Mm-hmm. It's like, how do you argue with a god?
Oh, right? You don't.
But Picard did. Picard did.
And I think that's the way that he did it. He didn't necessarily argue in a temper tantrum way. He presented a logical demonstrate argument in the most diplomatic, advanced intellect possible way. He presented an argument. He did not try to play to Q's level. He elevated it.
Right, like with Cisco, Q said, "You hit me. Picard never hit me," and like right before Cisco swung, he kind of did that shrug and decked him.
Yeah,
but that he was just playing into Q's games. Like, well, we're here. You're annoying me, so pow. There's something to be said for just taking that kind of initiative. But Picard rarely, if ever, stooped to that level. The only time we really saw that was like in First Contact, and that's something get into later. But that was a much different Picard.
Yes, it's as the show progressed, I think Best of Both Worlds is very much the turning point for Picard.
Mm-hmm.
I guess
absolutely.
You could really say it's Q Who when the Borg come to the ship, when they start getting interested in the Federation, they figure out who the Federation are, and Picard where they are. Mm-hmm. Although you can argue that they already knew where the Federation were because of the events of First Contact and then Enterprise.
Yeah.
Circular logic is circular. We'll go with Q Who. I think that there's something that okay, Picard's there and he's clearly being set up as a not an anti-hero by any means, but as somebody who's going to be of great importance, and you don't know where this is going to go. And I think we even saw this play in with a lot of the Romulans going back and forth. Mm-hmm. Picard's head-to-head against like Aladar Jarok. He's there with the Defector. He's there with the Romulan, the Vulcan ambassador, who turns out to be a Romulan double agent. Picard is at the forefront of these Romulan negotiations, and some of them are going Picard's way, some of them aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And you start kind of going, how is he escaping this much? And should he be court-martialed for a couple of these things? Don't really know.
Yeah, it's tough.
But as the Best of Both Worlds happens, right? And obviously there's extenuating circumstances with Patrick Stewart. This is a ploy to give the writers an out if the contract negotiations don't go the right way. But it still sets up, okay, what happens in a world without Picard? And we see that come to fruition in Season 7 with Parallels. We get to see
also with the Worst of Both Worlds, the comic.
Yes.
Where the parallel world where Picard was never recovered.
Yes. Fortunately, the story we get has Picard there.
Thankfully.
We talked about it earlier, where he does then spend an episode on Earth contemplating his future with Starfleet. There are several episodes in the following seasons where he meets Vash or Vosh on at Ryza, does archaeological stuff with Professor Galen, uh, goes on the Fortune as an archaeological expert, and you start to see these other sides of Picard as somebody who's more than a Starfleet captain, but has these interests outside of Starfleet. And you go, huh, there is a man behind the uniform, outside of the four pips on the collar.
Exactly. There's more to Picard than just the 4 pips.
And I think if it wasn't for the best of both worlds, for that entire setup with him being assimilated, I don't know that we get that same story development with Picard the character.
Agreed. Like, you need a foil. You need something to humanize your character so they become more relatable rather than just being some picture perfect, hero candy that's two-dimensional.
And I don't know that Picard was ever two-dimensional. Not to knock anything you're saying, but I think he did lack some depth of an individual character. I think he could kind of fit in a box of career military man.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
we have assumptions on who that character is. That label carries a certain set of parameters with the label.
mm-hmm.
And the more development that went into the character starts to rewrite the label and say, okay, this label probably isn't accurate.
Well, it's less of like a label or a shoebox so much as here's the idea of this man. This is a superficial observation, but then you go in closer and you see more aspects, more perspectives. You get more depth into the character. It's really much like life, like how we often prejudge people based on one or two interactions, even moments of extended interactions. And it's not until we take a moment to step back or to give time to learn and know someone before we really have a better idea of who and what they are. And we had 7 seasons, a bunch of movies, and 3 more seasons to really get a grasp of the man Jean-Luc Picard. And it wasn't until the Picard series that we really got to understand his origins.
Right. We saw bits of it. We saw when the Ferengi brought the Stargazer. We got insights
Mm-hmm.
into his time as captain of the Stargazer. We saw when Q gave him a chance to revisit his time at the Academy, and then he doesn't get stabbed by the Nausicaans.
Lieutenant J.G. Picard.
Right. So then without the risk take, without the being that brashness,
Boldness.
yeah, he just isn't the same man. And
He lacked the confidence, the ambition, the drive.
it's truly fascinating. And
Mm-hmm.
those are great what if moments, because I think many of us, just as humans, start going, well, what if this aspect of my life had been different? Well, it doesn't matter how much credence you give to your past, how much you do with self-introspection. I think there's always at least a moment where you sit back and you go, huh, well, what if? What could my life have been?
And Picard got another taste of that in The Inner Light,
Oh,
or with
yes.
the probe, where the Resican, the Resican people, where he lived that entire life as a husband, a father, a grandfather, a life that Picard never had as Jean-Luc, right? But as Kamen, he had this whole other opportunity, and then he came away from that, and I'm sure that is one major factor in him comprehending the loss of his brother and nephew in generations, because there will be no more Picards.
Yes.
End of the line.
Which
So I think that
makes
also added more weight. Go ahead.
it makes Jack even more important in season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was going to say, before we even jump that far, I think the inner light and then the connection we get to Neela Darin in that
Mm-hmm.
Firestorm
Nella,
episode,
yeah.
or Nella, sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
All good.
when Picard starts to contemplate a meaningful relationship, how that Resican flute truly gives him this musical connection, which he was always interested in music, but that gives him another character depth aspect.
Mm-hmm.
He uses
Another
that.
way to humanize and connect him with other people
Yes.
beyond his command structure.
And then, he realizes, I can't have a meaningful relationship with somebody under my command structure. It compromises my ability to be objective.
Mm-hmm.
And then
With both sad and wise at the same time.
I think the inner light also lends some credence to him being more open to being a father figure, because
Mm-hmm.
we see him start to mentor Rolaren.
Yeah.
And if that's not a father relationship, a father daughter relationship, in the best way that Picard knows how to do that, I don't know what is.
Professional with a strong slant towards personal, because they did bond in that father daughter sense. You could tell, and that also emphasized, it punched up Picard's disappointment in her leaving.
Yes. And there's nothing. I don't think there were any professional lines crossed there. I don't think it
No.
ever became anything beyond, hey, this is a mentor relationship. But it just resembled Picard caring, being empathetic, truly pouring himself, his knowledge into another person, which I think is something perhaps they wanted to have with Wesley, but it was
Mm-hmm.
never realized.
Right. Yeah, they sort of teased at that, given almost like Uncle Jean-Luc aspect of being the best friend of Jack Crusher, Beverly Howard's, husband, and then Wesley. But they had such a brick wall connection between Jean-Luc and Wesley with the whole, he brought a child onto my bridge. But they did start the sort of mentorship there. Like, once Picard softened to Wes and actually kind of endorsed his application to the academy and everything, right? And that shuttle crash that they had together with that weird pilot.
Yes.
Like they did start to soften Picard to youth and have an almost father uncle sort of role there. They never went too far with it, or they never went very far with it, I should say.
Right.
They
I
just
think
kind of,
there's a moment
yeah.
there, but I don't know. There was always that weird tension between Jean-Luc and Beverly, and
Yes.
I love that they produced a child. I
Mm-hmm.
hate that they didn't end up in a fulfilling relationship.
Yeah, because we wanted more for these characters that we fell in love with over the years. It's like, do you want people you care about to suffer and be sad and lonely and all that? You see
No.
them struggle, you want them to come out ahead.
Right. My
So it was disappointing, to be sure, but at least we got something positive out of it.
Yeah, the beta book canon had Picard still captain of the E, and Beverly Crusher is the chief medical officer, and they have a child together.
Mm.
But
I haven't read that. Definitely on my list now.
yeah, it's oh goodness, what is it? It's the Typhon Pact series.
Oh, okay.
which follow up from the Destiny series. But we'll talk books in another episode.
Sounds good.
Um, I was, gosh, as the sidebar, and I promise this won't take long. Somebody was commented on one of my videos the other day, and I said, "Boy, I'm starting to sound a lot like Alton Brown on Good Eats, but that's another show." And eventually
That
we'll
goes
just
over
have
my
a
head.
stack of, but that's another shows that never get realized. But um,
The loose ends.
yes, far too many loose threads. Uh,
It's like the Star Trek CCG All Good Things pack was tying up all the loose ends of everything that was referenced in the card game that never got its counterpart or whatnot. So they finally gave it to us in the end.
yeah.
So this will be the Warp Core Breach edition.
Oh, at some point, yeah, we'll definitely
Yeah.
wrap it at some point there. Uh, but yeah, so then we get season 7 of Next Gen, and we get All Good Things, and All Good Things, I mean, by all means, a fantastic series finale.
Mm-hmm.
But the highlight there for me with Picard is when he sits down at the poker table
Yes.
and the wall breaks between captain and crew. And he
You were always welcome.
exactly. And then they pulled that theme into the end of season 3 of Picard, and they sit around 10 forward playing cards
Mm-hmm.
at the very end, and it's like, okay, we got something here. This is how it should have ended. It's like,
Yeah.
the popular YouTube channel, how it should have ended. You don't have to fix season 3 of Picard. It ended the right way.
Yeah.
But I love the theming, the connection there that says, okay, we've got this, and we're going to bring it forward. Because that's what that crew did. And for Picard to finally say or show, I'm a part of this, he understood what mattered. And I understand he could not always be there. But I'm glad that he realized at the end that it was the people who mattered most.
Absolutely. Ships can be built, rebuilt, repaired, replaced. People can. Although Alton Soong might argue that.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, you got to at least have the consciousness of a person readily available
Right.
to transfer. But yeah,
Little about Alton Soong, a little bit of Q, a lot of love, make it happen.
a little bit of
Yeah, and the Euromont syndrome, one of the other Picard legacies that was also brought up with Nemesis after a fashion.
yeah. Okay, so we need to dive into movies. The movie versions of Picard.
Season 7 switching over to Star Trek First Contact.
Oh,
Drastic switch. But the middle in between with Generations, it's almost like Generations was a little bit of the All Good Things Picard, but a lot more of, like, say, season 4, 5 Picard.
yes.
Because it seemed like he lacked a little bit of the growth of that finale, but had a hint of it.
He did have a hint of it. But the other thing for me is, okay, so we went movie, we went blockbuster, and we went Picard's now the action hero.
Right.
And that's a theme that carries through for 4 movies.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
he didn't quite go full action hero in Generations, though. It was still more of like the TOS Kirk and a little bit of TNG for Generations, like the fight with Tully and Soren and that. But he didn't really go like G.I. Joe, Schwarzenegger, action hero, what have you, until First Contact.
True.
There was still exposition and emotion and character with Generations, right? His relationship with Data, one in Stellar Cartography, his addressing and discussions with Kirk, there's a lot of that, and that is still more of the human emotional family kind of context. But then when you get to Star Trek First Contact, it's like, no, the Borg hurt me. I want to hurt them back. You know what I'm saying?
And I fully understand that the Borg being on your ship, trying to take your ship over, that would probably be a sore spot.
Oh, yeah.
I can understand the anger. I'm not sure I quite understand the anger to the point of destroying your glass case of starships and not listening to your crew in any way.
You broke your little ships.
Yeah. But there's a point where it's like, okay, I love First Contact. It's a great movie.
Oh, me too.
But the characterization of Picard doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
There's something that if all the other characters feel right, but Picard feels hell-bent on revenge.
Like a different person.
Yes. We see him in other Borg encounters. In the previous two encounters that Picard had with the Borg after being assimilated, with Hugh and the crashed scout ship, and then Lore's rogue Borg, he wasn't hell-bent on destroying the Borg or anything like that. And I understand these are different stakes. These aren't the fate of the Enterprise, the fate of humanity. But there's still a certain, Picard isn't having this visceral reaction to Borg. And then we get First Contact and he goes crazy.
Of that, though. There was a build-up to that, though, which makes it still make sense. When you're talking with Guinan and Picard about Hugh, where it's almost like a let them die moment, right? Where like the Borg ravaged, the Elorian people, which we didn't even know the name of Guinan's people at the time, not until Tony and Soren. But we have that time where Picard really has to strongly weigh, like, do we just try to destroy the Borg with this, or do we care about Hugh, or do we just fight the Borg, or what do we do? Like, that sort of inner thought battle is a precursor to his more visceral, more emotional reaction in First Contact. So there is that build-up. The consequences of the Hugh episode with the Lore's fractured Borg didn't really say much as far as Picard's connection to it all. That was more of a Data and Lore thing, right?
Okay, I can see that.
Out of Picard. Yeah. But at least the Hugh episode gives us a bridge to First Contact. It makes it more believable. And especially when we're following the loss of his brother and his nephew in Generations, he's more emotionally damaged by that point because he feels lost. He's lost everything but his work family. Like the part that is Jean-Luc is all but dead at that point. All that's left is Captain Picard. And so he has to make the rest of his life out of Captain Picard. The Jean-Luc side of things, the family, the other Picard, that's gone. There's nothing left. So he's almost a hollow man at that point. You know what I mean?
Which is what
so he reaches that breaking point. Yeah.
It's what makes season 2 of Picard so poignant and yet difficult for Jean-Luc, being back in
Mhm.
the old Picard stomping grounds,
Yeah,
going,
the
well, this
vineyard of old, and Mhm.
this is what family used to be.
Yeah, and he didn't exactly have the happy home growing up either.
No, no,
It
he
wasn't
did
all
not.
Frere Chaka.
Oh, goodness.
And we learned the English origins of the Frenchman,
Yes, which
right?
was a great tie-in. I don't. It felt a little contrived, but I'll take it. It does make
It's a
sense.
great way to explain why you have Patrick Stewart, Englishman, playing Jean-Luc Picard, the Frenchman.
Yes, it
Pardon
is.
me for butchering it a little.
I think we will always
Yeah.
butcher it. If we want to get it right, we'll hire a Frenchman.
Well, it's like, how often have you heard the tale where you have, like, say, an East Indian or a Japanese or some other person from a foreign country going to Cambridge, Oxford, or even somewhere in the States. So they're in their, older formative years, but their teenage years or whatnot, and then they're coming back to their home country, and they may have a stronger, American or British English accent than they do Japanese or Hindu, Punjabi, or wherever they come from
Yes,
originally, wherever they're born from, because they spent so much time in the other realm. So for Patrick Stewart, voice at himself to be this French captain, it's far more believable and very likely, especially given that we know that they ran away to England, to get away from France in that time.
yes, and it is a sobering reminder of history and how it still plays a part in our fantasy world, but
Mm-hmm.
those connections that Picard has to his roots makes him even more relatable to us
More
as
human.
people. Yes. Um,
Yes. Dare I say fourth dimensional?
ooh, nice. I do want to mention before we close this out, and I don't know when we're going to close it out, but I still want to get it on here. Um, Early season 2 of Picard, when they are in an alternate reality. I'm not going to call it the mirror universe, but it's
The
an alternate.
Confederation.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is refreshing to see some, well, at least Picard in an alternate history, a mirror universe, as you might, and
Oh.
how easily that Picard and Seven can slip into those characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it reiterates that it's a lot easier for good to go bad than it is for bad to go good.
Which we'll remember from the original series episode where we first encounter the mirror universe, and the two Kirks crossing over. The evil Kirk couldn't play nice, but the nice Kirk could feign evil.
Yes, yeah,
At least play along for a while.
long enough,
That's a legacy of Star Trek too.
and that Spock was a man of integrity in any universe. But
Damn right.
that's another episode. Uh, yeah, I know that Star Trek would not be the same without Captain Kirk. He is iconic. William Shatner is iconic. I mean, my goodness, the man went to space. But I don't think modern Star Trek would be what it is without Patrick Stewart and Captain Picard.
Yeah, if we didn't have TNG when we did, I don't think that the franchise, the legacy of Star Trek, would have gone on the way it did at all. It might have fizzled out itself after maybe a few more movies with, Kirk and company. Without something to breathe new life, to carry it on to a next generation, it might very well have died on the vine, so to speak.
I don't Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to know, right?
Right. What if?
It's a what if, and it's a thought to ponder. But
Mhm.
this this episode's meant to just let us reflect on Patrick Stewart and more importantly Jean-Luc Picard as the character, because none of us claim to know Patrick Stewart, the actor, but we claim to know the character that was presented on screen for 10 seasons and 4 movies.
Right.
Gosh, 10
And that's
seasons. That's almost Worf.
yes.
I think
Uh,
Worf's Michael Dorn with Worf still has the record for most episodes.
I believe that would still hold true, especially considering how many episodes of Picard he was in.
Yeah, you got another like eight
Yeah,
or nine. Yeah,
yeah. And given that shows these days don't run 26 episodes per season anymore, they're anywhere from 3 to like 6, 18, 21 is pushing it. I don't think any modern series commonly goes beyond about 18.
no,
Oh, there's going to be some, sure, but very few.
sure. Nobody's gonna beat Michael Dorn's record. No, that record's safe.
And I still love that in a TV Guide interview, he says, if I'm still doing this in 10 years, shoot me, but only in the leg. And he's the one who keeps coming back the most. Right on, Michael. Always happy to have you.
Yeah. Um, I think that is a nice segue. Captain Picard is not Captain Picard without his bridge crew, without his crew in general. But that TNG family, the Riker, Data, Geordi, Worf, Beverly, Deanna, that crew is what makes Picard.
Mm-hmm.
His trusted advisors, his his crew, his family, and you know, I'm in the minority who enjoyed season 1 and 2 of Picard, but I'm
Oh,
definitely
I
in,
definitely enjoyed them. I could nitpick it to high heaven, but I thoroughly enjoyed both seasons.
yeah. Um, I will say there are great moments where we do see Picard in that mentor, fatherly role that was teased at in Next Gen, but delivered truly here. Because he knew that he was old, that he didn't have the capacity to be all that he used to be, but he still had a lot to offer.
Mm-hmm.
But he also knew that his best use of himself was to help train the next generation, pun intended. It's how do I want to put this? It goes to who the character is. Picard, when we first meet him, I think has a lot to prove. He wants to establish who he is, that he matters, that we should pay attention to him. And by the end, he's like, "You already know who I am. You know why I'm important. Now let me help you be better."
Yeah, and even though the Enterprise was not his first command, it was his first command of the flagship of the Federation, not just Starfleet, but the entire Federation. So he had some pretty heavy shoes to fill. And despite his history up to that point that we knew nothing of at that point, he as a character, not just to the audience, had a lot to prove.
Yeah.
It's like, I can do this. Like, I have all these people. I've pulled together these people that I've determined, are right for this position. But I still have to mold them. I still have to raise them up. Like, look at Riker's arc from season 1 to 7 alone. Riker would not achieve half of what he did without someone like Picard, encouraging him and supporting him, pushing him,
Well,
right?
Geordi goes from being the nav officer to chief engineer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Commodore. I mean, my goodness. Worf goes from what, reserve, tactical, occasional like con officer. Worf kind of goes from the fill-in to
Mm-hmm.
head tactical officer and apparently captain of the Enterprise E at some point. Uh, Beverly,
That's
head of.
not my fault.
Yeah, exactly, and we'll talk about that at some point. That definitely is another episode. Beverly, head of Starfleet Medical. Data, well, that's a mess to sort out, but Data
That's
has
3 episodes.
Data has the flexibility to discover what it means to be human, to live, to sacrifice himself, to die of his own choosing, to
He
live.
transcends technology to become alive, to die, to resurrect in multiple ways. You're like, yeah.
And Deanna is the constant guide, and I think Deanna is maybe the most human of all of us. Well, of all of them, and represents so much of humanity. And
Yeah, she's some of the checks and balances. She's the one's like, hey, maybe we should take a step back here, or maybe it's all right if we go a little bit further.
yeah, and not to say she didn't have her moments of silliness. They all had their moments, but
Yeah, she may very well be one of the least utilized characters in the early run of TNG, and I'm so glad that they gave her more to do. And that's another thing too, is we didn't see a lot on screen of Picard mentoring her when she took the command test and all that and became a full-fledged officer, a command level officer. But if you think behind the camera, the scenes we didn't see, you must believe that Picard took her hand, metaphorically speaking, and helped groom her to be a more capable bridge officer.
yeah, there had to be more that happened there, because
Mm-hmm.
well, and if not directly, then Picard had to play a part in her being ready for that,
Setting an
because
example, right?
all the conversations the two of them would have in the ready room.
Mm-hmm.
Eh,
So she'd have to flip the script on all those conversations and keep them in the back of her mind when she is in a position to make similar decisions.
yes. Uh,
So she'll understand him and the role of a commander even more.
there are
And as closed off as Jean-Luc Picard was throughout the run of TNG, Deanna and Guinan were probably the two people that he was the most open with.
yes,
And that's not counting the sides, like even the direct connection with Beverly. But that was a different sort of thing. Deanna and Guinan were more connected to Captain Picard, or Beverly was more connected to Jean-Luc.
right. Beverly had breakfast with Jean Luc before the pips went on.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
So it's
and we see
interesting.
Picard open up to Riker in certain moments, to Data in certain moments. They have their times. We see him open up to like Professor Galen and Vosh and Nella, but yeah, Picard bears his soul metaphorically to Guinan and Deanna.
Exactly. They're the two that get to see the more vulnerable side of him in the captain and command in the official professional capacity. Say, I am not a perfect man. I am not immune to the effects, of being in this chair. having these pips, right?
Right,
And
absolutely.
we were talking a lot about how his influence on the rest of the crew. Now we're getting into how the rest of the crew influenced him and helped grow him as a character and as a person, right? Because it goes both ways.
It absolutely does.
Picard would not be who he was without them.
Well, and no relationship is one-sided. It's impossible for any dynamic, any friendship, any professional relationship, whatever you have, to be all give and no take, or all
It
take and no
breaks
give.
down too quickly. It ceases to be a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's being used, and that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
You always get something out of a dynamic with somebody else. You know, I'm in the middle of being mentored as a relatively new teacher, and my mentor teacher tells me, at least periodically, that I am teaching them new ideas or giving them new perspectives to think about things. And that is one of the most exciting things when I get that kind of feedback.
Yes.
And I know
Yes.
that's not necessarily how Picard would work or something he would necessarily say, but you can imagine Riker would have gone to a conference and come back with some idea and talk to Picard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And or Beverly goes off to a scientific conference and comes back and has this different idea to talk about with the senior staff. And you know, you
Or
would
over tea.
think, yeah, or talk, you know, over tea about something. And it works. This is a community. You have to I have to imagine there is a big professional community that's happening here, and there's just these off hours that we don't see because they're not interesting or engaging to the story that's to be told, but there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that we get a lot from either the comics sometimes, but more the books, is that there's more room for that behind the scenes meat. And the benefit of how well the stories were told on screen in TNG and the movies in Picard is that we can extrapolate what probably happened, you know, between scenes and things like that, and leading up to or following, because of how well the characters have been delivered, how nourished our Trek spirit was with watching, you know, 10 seasons and I think it's what, 5 movies? You know?
uh Four.
Four.
Yeah.
Four, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
Generations,
feels like
First
more.
Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis.
Right. It feels like more.
It does. I
Yeah.
think we can always wish there was another one, but
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm content. You know, after Nemesis, I wish there was another one, but
Yeah, I truly feel we needed at least one more to kind of cap off the TNG cinematic.
I would have liked like a TNG DS9 Voyager massive team up movie, but
Oh God, yes. Now you're going into nerdgasm territory.
yeah, I know. Okay, I think we're at a nice place. We can wrap up the idea here. So my question to you, and I'll give my answer as well. But what's your single greatest Jean-Luc Picard memory moment takeaway?
Well, the answer that I gave in when we kind of touched on it back in the old Warp Core Breach days was the inner light, because I had a similar experience myself, so I can directly relate to what Jean-Luc went through with that. And, going in a different direction this time, it's got to be the realizing he's a father and meeting his son after so many years. Like I myself was separated from my kids for about a decade, And then I got my son back about 5 years ago, and having that chance to reconnect with my son, to be a father renewed, is one more thing that I can relate to what he's going through. And seeing him struggle, seeing his feelings, his emotions, and feeling for him, connecting with him, it's one more reason why I love Star Trek. It's so real while being a space fiction fantasy that there's so many aspects of it that connect to people of all walks of life, of all styles, everything. It's so truly human. And as much as I love so many of the characters in Star Trek, I honestly have to say that Jean-Luc is the one that I can connect with the most.
That's a great answer, and I can't possibly hope to compete with the personal relevance of that answer. I wanted to say when he's piloting the Argo in Nemesis, because that was just fun.
Great moment. He's
That's
like a kid.
That truly is fun, and to see the smile on his face, and Worf's line of "I will never understand the human predilection or propensity for unsafe velocities," or maybe that was Data's line. Whatever, the line that's in the Argo for that.
Right.
But for me, and I talked about it earlier, it's Picard sitting down at the poker table.
Yeah.
And to see that your boss is willing to sit down and join you in that activity, it's so meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to say, we're all in this together.
There is a distance to a degree that you need when you're like employer and employee, captain and officers and things like that. But I've often felt that you can be friends with your child. You can be friends with your employee. So many people will tell you that you can't cross that line. I wholeheartedly disagree, because those lines are fluid. There's times when you have to be firm and be the boss, and then there's times when you can be friends. Yeah. And navigating those eddies of life is what makes us human and what allows us to grow and be better people. And we're nothing without the people in our lives. We're just one side of a coin. We don't truly understand who we are until we compare ourselves to others and see their influence on us. So Picard helped grow his people, his crew, his family, just as they did for him.
That's very well said. So my kind of final parting thought is something that I remember from my high school days, and that is the concept of the ripple effect, which is everything you do causes a ripple, and that ripple that you make will affect others, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. And it is important to be cognizant of the ripples that you make in your life. So if you have no other takeaway from today and listening to this, just let that be your takeaway.
Let your ripples make waves, but make them good ones.
There you go. Well said. Thank you all for listening to Warp Core Breach. Let us know what you think.
4.
That's going to end it.
This is Nick.
3.
And this is David.
2.
Ejecting the
1.
core.
Warp core ejected.
Warp Core Breach is produced by Nick Norris and David Montgomery, with additional content from our contributors. Our computer is voiced by Corinne Donnelly.
Warp Core Breach is not endorsed, sponsored, or affiliated with CBS Studios Incorporated or the Star Trek franchise. All Star Trek trademarks and logos are owned by CBS Studios Incorporated.
All sound files are used under Creative Commons 3.0 by attribution. For specifics, please visit our Facebook page by searching Warp Core Breach Podcast. If you want to contribute to the show, let us know on the Facebook page, or you can email us at warpcorebreachpodcast@gmail.com.